Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Mary Ignatiadis, the Forest Policy and Economics Lead here at Renoster. And a lot of my role at Renoster is figuring out how do we design a forest carbon program that really works for small landowners. And so today I'm really excited to have in our Apollo in Action webinar, Sophie Westover from Wren and Ted Wright, Renoster's very own outreach forester, to talk about equitable forest carbon programs for small landowners. So Sophie and Ted, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Sophie, head of climate at Wren. So I lead project sourcing and due diligence and manage the relationships with all of our project partners. Wren makes it easy for businesses and individuals to act on the climate crisis. Our core product is a B2C platform where individuals can log on to calculate their carbon footprint and then offset by funding one of two portfolios that we manage. Wren funds projects across the spectrum, everything from nature-based projects to super pollutant mitigation, durable CDR, as well as a segment of climate policy and conservation work that falls outside the VCM, but we still think is critical to solving the climate crisis. We started partnering with Renoster in September of this year and became their first buyer of the Apollo project. And yeah, really excited to be on this call to chat more about the landowner perspective.
Perfect. Uh, Ted Wright, so I'm the outreach forester for Renoster. Um, I am a consulting forester by trade, and so I work with small landowners throughout the state of Maine. And in this role, I've working with landowners throughout the state, basically doing outreach work, talking to landowners, doing outreach events and things with Renoster, and then all around like helping Renoster's team with meeting landowners and discussing some of the issues around land ownership in Maine to help the Renoster program better meet those um, issues. So glad to be here.
Great. Thanks to both of you. So let's start with why is working with small landowners so important? Sophie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. I think in the United States, working with small landowners is important because first, with small landowners are the biggest ownership type in the United States. So something like 39% of the forested land in the US is owned by family forests or people who own small tracts of land of forest. And so without not capturing that impact, I think we're leaving impact on the table. And by working with small landowners, we're able to capture some of the climate impact that's associated with that forested land. There's one study that says 5.5 billion metric tons of above ground tree forest carbon are stored in the United States in these smallholder forests. That's roughly equal to the annual emissions of the United States. And so I think that there's massive impact on the table for us, for those working in the climate space, and capturing that is critical. I also think that working with small landowners is important because they have a unique set of challenges that they grapple with on a day-to-day basis, whether that's economic, social, holding on to their land, improving biodiversity, passing that land on to their children. These landowners have a different set of criteria than maybe a large forest organization does, like Weyerhaeuser. And so I think that by working with these landowners, we're not only addressing um, the economic and social challenges that they face, but we're also kind of tapping into this kind of potential that there is to generate climate mitigation impact.
Great. Ted, do you want to contribute some of what you see as a consulting forester in terms of why working with small landowners is so important?
Sure. Uh, in from the Maine perspective, Maine has like 6 million acres of uh, land that's owned by small landowners. So people with like 50 acres, 100 acres, and all these people that own this land, they have other jobs. So they're not a forest manager. They're a nurse or firefighter, or teacher, what have you, but they have this piece of land behind their house that that they take care of and they enjoy. And so it's just a different, like Sophie said, it's a different set of challenges that come with that because they don't know a lot about their land. And so one of the things I see in Maine is like historically we've always had, people want to be able to say that their land is not, or their forest land is not a drain on their finances, and taxes are rising in Maine. And so when the forest becomes a drain on financially to somebody with 100 acres, they basically have two options. One is timber harvest, and two would be to subdivide and sell, and then it becomes development. And in the last few years, development pressure has always been there, but it's just increased enormously. And it's in the southern part of the state and the central part of the state where this is increasing. So working with small landowners, Apollo working with small landowners provides another option. So you have a third option, which is forest carbon. It doesn't fit every landowner. They're all unique, but it does give them options and it gives them flexibility. So it's just another thing to choose from, and I think people really appreciate that.
Great. So Ted and Sophie, I know that you were on the ground together in Maine visiting small landowners and really digging into their why for participating in forest carbon, kind of understanding their management objectives and really trying to get at what is it that Apollo can do for them. So I was hoping that you could each speak to that a little bit. Sophie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, visiting the landowners in Maine was a really rewarding experience for myself and the Wren team, and it really gave us more of a granular perspective on the why and the how and the motivations that bring landowners to Apollo. Of course, every landowner is different. I think we ended up visiting some fairly charismatic and knowledgeable landowners during our visit. But it was certainly wonderful to learn more about the different objectives and goals that they have. So, for the landowners that we were visiting, they really wanted to steward this land to be able to pass on to the next generation. They wanted to identify different ways in which they could utilize their forest for things like recreation or increasing biodiversity, contrib or tapping into other forest product industries. And one anecdote, I guess, to share is Bonnie, that one of the landowners was talking about cultivating chaga on their forest landscape, and chaga is a mushroom that can be used for, skincare products or medicinal products. I think it's being studied for cancer research as well. And so really just kind of eye-opening to see, it's maybe forest products or lumber is long-lived forest products is just kind of one avenue that they can take to generate revenue from their land, but there are all of these other both economic pathways that they can pursue, as well as like emotional, meaningful things that really resonated with them, like sharing that land with their children, going hunting on that land with their children, sharing that land with their grandchildren. Really kind of drew this like emotional connection to the forest for those folks. So yeah, I think just kind of getting that kind of on the ground perspective really brought like a broader suite of activities to the table and helped Wren understand, okay, yes, like this is a forest carbon program, and by deferring harvest, we're able to capture, X, Y, and Z climate benefit, but there are all of these other attributes to the land that are important. And my assumption is that for each landowner, those goals and objectives are different. Which is why I think Apollo is great in the sense that it's really serves as like this boutique service that can work with landowners in different ways, in the ways that they're important to them.
And Ted, you were at the site visit. You know those landowners very well. You know a lot of landowners really well. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how Apollo can help landowners meet different kinds of management goals?
Sure. Um, yeah, you know, I think I mentioned earlier that Apollo is not for every landowner, right? People have to learn about it and see if it fits. And I will say, like Maine landowners, and I know it's probably the same across the country, but it's pretty unique. You may have two landowners with the same objectives, but they're going to have two totally different parcels of land due to like past history, past agriculture, harvesting history, and all that. So you may think, I'm going to talk to these two people today, and they're very similar. They have very similar objectives. You call one on the phone, and they have white pine stand of 120 years old, and then you have somebody else that has a stand that's 25 years old. So you can't. I have not met one person who has the same exact objectives with the same exact piece of land. And so that makes it unique. Every phone call is different. Every situation is different. People are at different stages in their life. They have different goals as far as where the land goes after they pass on or what have you. So I think it's very it's challenging to say that there's one size fits all and who's going to choose Renoster. So each time we have a phone call, I'm going to hear different things. I'm going to learn about different things. And it's just interesting because some people I've talked to, and these are usually older folks, some of them see Renoster as something that'll help their land carry on to the next generation. Some see it as maybe restrictive to put it in a carbon program. Others want to put it into the carbon program because then their children can't sell it or subdivide it. So it's very interesting how people come down. They're trusting their children and where it goes next, or they're not trusting. And that's trying to be a little bit funny here, but it's really interesting to have this many conversations. And here I've heard that come up so many times on both sides that I just think, what we're getting into here is that there's just a lot of opportunities, a lot of benefits that Renoster brings to different people. And like I said earlier, just giving them another option, for holding on to their land, I think is really, really important.
Great. So let's dig into the specifics of how a Renoster is making that happen with the Apollo program. Just to kind of set the stage for folks, we have our online platform that showcases parcel information and carbon credit eligibility. We also have in-person outreach, which Ted heads up. And then we have the bigger picture of how we're connecting landowners to buyers through those kind of multi-pronged outreach solutions. So let's start digging into how the Apollo program bridges land stewardship and climate action for landowners who might have these management objectives that on the surface, they might not be able to see that they have anything to do with climate action. Sophie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. How Apollo bridges land stewardship and climate objectives. I think like at the core of it, really, it's the management practices change in a way that increases carbon storage and carbon sequestration over time. Like that's really the kind of at a very base level, that's what's happening. How we're kind of connecting the dots for those landowners, I think that from what I've heard from at least being on the site with Peter and Bonnie, the landowners that we were visiting, like a lot of these owners are kind of seeing climate change happening before their eyes. They're seeing harvesting times need to change because of when the ground freezes or where winter is happening, and they're seeing growth patterns change, species patterns change. And so they're really the people who are on the front ground kind of witnessing climate change happening before our eyes. I mean, I think a lot of us are, right? Like we're all seeing snow happening later in the season, et cetera. But I think for people who are connected with the land and have their income tied to the land, that climate change and like land stewardship connection is like more front and center for them. And so I think the how behind Apollo is, ultimately a management practice that is tied to this like larger story of climate change. And for these landowners, I think understanding like, okay, this is happening and like maybe what is the role that I have to play in addressing this larger issue could be a motivating factor for those who are going out and saying, okay, well, I'm going to change my management practices to contribute to climate change mitigation overall. Um, yeah, that would be my short answer.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic, and thinking about how our what forest carbon can really do to connect those dots is kind of our whole why at Renoster. And so, Ted, do you want to talk about kind of the barriers that landowners face in identifying management practices that will work for their land in a changing climate, getting the financing for those? I'm specifically thinking about barriers to enrollment in forest carbon programs for small landowners, why they haven't had access to these markets before, and then translating that into an understanding of climate action for small landowners.
Sure. Um, in terms of climate action, I think one of the unique things that I hear when I talk to people is that they don't realize that there's people that want to uh, purchase the credits from their land and use that as a way to uh, for climate benefits, right? And I think people really feel special, right? Usually it's the mill or wants your wood, right? To take to their sawmill and then they can do something with it. Now you have a different person, with a different goal that's saying, hey, we can use your forest to help offset uh, climate changes and things like that. And so I think that's people always want to be a part of something. And I think when I talk to these different landowners, they feel pretty special that people want to help them, and in turn it helps the buyers and things like that with their goals. So that's a little bit about like how I see carbon markets playing into that. In terms of like management and things, I mean, there's just not a lot of money for management in this area unless you have a harvest to go with it. I mean, people will invest money into pre-commercial thinning and different things like that. Most of the times, almost all the time, unless it's a large industrial landowner, that's through NRCS, so Natural Resources Conservation Service Agency or whatever that is. NRCS will provide off cost share. Not a lot of people are involved in that. So there's a ton of land in Maine that's could use pre-commercial thinning. But like I said, the money, people usually don't take their own money from their own personal bank account to put that into that land. And so, carbon markets can help with that and help improve their forest in that time frame. So yeah, I guess that's kind of how one way it can change management practices or help with management practices.
Great. I want to draw attention too to the fact that as of this month, approximately 20% of Maine's harvestable acreage across the entire state is either in a forest carbon program or about to be formally enrolled in a forest carbon program. It's in the verification process. And no, almost none of that encompasses small landowners. And so we're seeing large landowners get these benefits that you're talking about, Ted, from carbon, being able to invest more in good stewardship, being able to invest more in long-term timber revenues, long-term ability to profit from a future climate smart forest products industry. But small landowners are struggling just to pay the taxes on their property, let alone getting it ready for a future climate smart world. And so that's kind of one of been the big whys at Renoster is how do we democratize access to carbon markets? Like to us, that's really a big piece of this equitable access uh, issues that we're talking about today. The title is Equitable Forest Carbon for Small Landowners. And so, Ted, do you want to kind of talk about why the Apollo platform is unique, kind of what we've been doing to address the technical and educational barriers keeping small landowners out of the market?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing, talking to different people, and like I said, I've talked to people with 25 acres up to 40,000 acres or more. Um, the enrollment costs, I think, were always a big barrier. And that's where Renoster can, really lowers that cost by a lot. The enrollment costs are zero. I think that's, kept that that medium-sized landowner out of the marketplace because basically they're going to have to put down again. It's just like investing in forest management. They're going to have to invest a lot of money into inventory and different things, which I just don't think they're doing. And so Renoster comes at it with the zero cost enrollment, and which is great. It can be, people can get interested and they're not going to be hesitant because they know it's not going to cost them to enroll. Um, Part of that is using Renoster's technology, which Mary and Elias can obviously speak a lot more to, but I know the Apollo platform. I mean, there's the landowners we share the platform with that are using it. I mean, they're using it a lot, right? They're learning about their forest. They're learning about the height of their trees. They can see the growth, like where different things are happening on their land. And that all kind of connects all the dots to them. And it makes it all make sense because these people, they may not get back into the back of their land and maybe a half mile back there all the time to see what's going on. So now Apollo provides a platform that shows them what's going on back there, kind of gives them a breakdown of the species, where all about the harvest levels and different things like that, and the chords and the volumes. And knowledge is power. And I think small landowners haven't always had things like this, like a powerful tool like this. Yeah, I know they haven't. And so I think that's where Apollo really fits in. It's a powerful tool that can provide, people that are just landowners and they're not in the forestry profession. They're just landowners, but it provides them a bunch of information that can be really useful for them for decision making, whether it's carbon markets or even just what's going on with their land. So I think that's pretty powerful stuff that Renoster provides, and it'll continue to provide. So
Great. And Sophie, I know you've seen carbon programs be implemented, I think, all over the world. What's your perspective on how Apollo is approaching these barriers?
Yeah, I think part of the reason that Ren was interested in Apollo was because of the data and the tools and the information that you guys are making available to these small landowners in ways that previously were not available. I think, historically speaking, there haven't really been these opportunities for landowners to participate in the carbon markets. There was like a study back in like 2018 that said like zero point 0 or 0.1% of small landowners were involved in carbon markets. And I think generally speaking, there's just like a lack of awareness, and like a lot of landowners may not even know what a carbon market is. I mean, it is kind of like a crazy concept to even communicate. Like, yeah, we're trading like tons of air, and like you can't see it or touch it, but like here's a credit, and like, now some corporate's going to use it to claim uh, some environmental goal against. And so it can feel like really ambiguous and vague and confusing. And the carbon market is small, it's evolving, the standards are changing, the public perception of carbon markets and carbon projects like are constantly kind of going through this media circus and conversations happening about it. So I think that there's like a lot of like if you were just to talk to a normal person up in Maine or anywhere who has a forest and you're like, hey, I'm gonna like sell some carbon from your trees. People are like, what are you talking about? Like, what does this mean for me? Right. And so I think that the way that Roster has set up their platform and the tool for landowners where you can click on your individual parcel and see this is my land. This is like my projected forest growth over time. If I harvest, if I don't harvest, like these are my tree species makeup, like the way that Apollo has been able to leverage LiDAR and some other really advanced tools around carbon accounting and modeling, and bringing all of that science down to the real world and having a landowner be able to say, oh, okay, wow, if I change my management plan to from pulp and paper over to long-lived forest products, then Renoster is saying that these are the economic benefits that I'm able to to get over time. And I think at the end of the day, for people who are, capacity constrained, resource constrained, have other jobs, as Ted mentioned, and kind of, forests are just kind of they have this forest tract land. Maybe it was passed down from generation to generation, or they, acquired it through some means. Speaking in economic terms to them is like what's the most powerful message. Like that's what the majority of us care about, right? At the end of the day, is like dollars in my pocket. And so kind of being able to translate these, you know, carbon accounting concepts or, fairly dense scientific concepts, connect them with, the market for carbon, and then connect it with the economic benefits that they can provide, I think is a really powerful tool. And that's like one of the ways that I see Renoster kind of democratizing access to carbon markets. And, I think when I was up in Maine talking to the landowners, they were like, Weyerhaeuser just signed this big deal. Like, kind of, why are they getting all of this money? But like, us who own, large tracts of land in aggregate are not being able to benefit from the economic value that carbon credits can provide. And I think providing them, with these opportunities or with these alternatives is a really, powerful mechanism at the end of the day. So that was definitely one of the reasons that like Apollo spoke to me as a credit purchaser was like, you know, individuals in the US are the people who own the largest amount of land by segment group, and um, figuring out how we can benefit those individuals, I think provides a really powerful story, not only for climate change mitigation, but also to rents consumers who really care about that individual connection and care about the person that's behind the story. And I think it's like honestly a bit of a harder sell to be like, hey, yeah, we're like putting more money in the pocket of this big forest company, as opposed to like we're putting more money in the pocket of like a small landowner who's struggling to pay their taxes. And now by buying carbon credits for them, we're giving them an opportunity to improve the management of their land. That was a bit long-winded, but that's
Well
my
put.
take.
Well put.
Sophie, I do want to dig more into why it's important that this connection not just flow from landowner information to buyer, but also that we're connecting buyers to landowners and creating a real shared understanding there about linking land stewardship and climate action. So I want to come back to that. But really quickly, before I do, Ted, I want to talk with you about a challenge that I think will be familiar to everyone in nature tech. I hope we have a lot of landowners listening to this webinar as well. So there are a lot of companies that are investing in better data collection and trying to find creative ways to apply that data to support nature solutions like forest carbon programs for small landowners. However, we know that a platform like Renoster's Apollo tool, even though it's really powerful, might not reach everyone in small communities because small rural communities often operate by word of mouth. You might start working with a program because someone that you trusts the program. These social elements of working in rural communities are really key to making Renoster's Apollo program work. And so I was hoping that you could share some information about how you're trying to meet landowners where they are.
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. Beyond the platform breaking down barriers, just we've really done a lot of outreach in different local newspapers, magazines, different things that people are going to pick up at the gas station. We've gone so far as to put up gas station signs that say, we'll pay you for trees and whatnot. And we've put those out in different gas stations around rural Maine. And I'll say this: if you take, in Maine, you have like 25 landowners that probably own, you know, over 100,000 acres or a couple 100,000 acres, right? They make up that 12 million acres of industrial forest land or whatever it is. That's 25 people. So you could go to one conference at the Maine Forest Products Council and you could tell everybody about carbon right there. And that would hit 12 million acres or whatever. It takes a lot to find the 100,000 small landowners in Maine, and get to them and tell them about forest carbon, and we're doing it, and we're doing it through town halls. We did a ton of outreach to like county fairs or fairs around the state. We have booths there, and just people go by and they say, "What the heck are you guys doing?" We're saying, "Hey, we're in forest carbon markets," and they're like, "What is that?" So we've had a ton of conversations with people that are just, that just telling them and talk to them about forest carbon and how it's a real thing and that it's in Maine. And most people, I mean, almost all the people are really excited about that. Whether it fits them or not, they're still excited about the opportunity for Maine and Maine landowners. Uh, so yeah, that's kind of one of the challenges, and I think we're hitting all the places. We're also working with a lot of different organizations like snowmobile organizations, places that they're outdoors, they have a lot of members and things like that. So we're hitting those places as well, so we can spread the spread the message. Because, like I said, you could have one meeting with all the large landowners and hit millions of acres with 25 different representatives there, and it's done. They know they can learn about carbon and all that stuff. It takes a lot to get to 100,000, all the 100,000 different landowners that own the 6 million or 7 million acres that exist in the state that are, under 100 acres or whatever. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks. It's been really exciting to hear about your work and all the landowners we have talked to. So thanks for that, Ted.
Sure.
So, Sophie, going back to this connection between buyers and landowners and the story that Ren is trying to tell, both through the background and the impact that the landowners are having, but also through project quality. Do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I think, yeah, there are kind of like two reasons why we care about who's on the ground implementing the project and why we want to tell those stories. I think the first is a story about quality. And so, carbon credits can cause reputational risk. And like that's one of the major concerns for buyers is like, is this going to end up in a Guardian article? And am I going to get called out for like funding a, low quality project? And I think knowing what's happening on the ground and knowing the challenges that landowners face is one of the steps that buyers can and should take in their diligence process. So for Ren's diligence process, we look at carbon accounting, project governance, but we also look at people and biodiversity. So we have a whole segment of questions that are just looking at how does this project interact with local communities? And I think that we know from multiple empirical studies and reviews that when local communities have genuine decision-making power in forest carbon projects, whether through rulemaking, stakeholder engagement, free prior and informed consent, multiple different avenues to kind of generate that connection or participation with local landowners, that those projects are the ones that tend to deliver higher quality carbon storage, stronger biodiversity outcomes, more sustained livelihood benefits. And all of those are kind of hallmarks of high quality, high integrity carbon projects. So for us, having the understanding of the challenges kind of gives us a fuller picture of project risks and opportunities, and ultimately gives us, another uh, tool or another check for us to look at in our due diligence process. And ultimately, we think, okay, if there's equitable benefit sharing, if the landowner is, getting 40 plus 65, percent of the revenue from the sale of the carbon credit, then like those are the projects that are going to be successful over the long run. Like ultimately, I believe that you have to fairly compensate the people on the ground doing the work in order for the project to be sustainable over the long term. Otherwise, people are going to pull out of the project, they're going to be unhappy with it. And the impact that we ultimately want to generate is not going to be generated over time. So that's a very critical step in our due diligence process. I think second, and maybe more unique to Ren, is that um, sharing stories with our consumers is like one of the ways that we are so successful at what we do. We really emphasize storytelling. We send project updates to our customers every month. As I mentioned in the beginning, Ren's kind of core product is a B2C subscription service. And so people know what projects they're funding and they want to hear about the impact that they're having on the ground. We do B2B work. And even in those B2B conversations, like I think it's pretty critical to be able to tell a business, like, this is the project that you're supporting, and this is the impact that it's having in terms of carbon storage and sequestration, but also these are the co-benefits that you're providing. This is why it's kind of a charismatic credit, so to speak. I think there's like maybe a tension between like a credit is a credit is a credit, and like every credit is a specific snowflake, a special snowflake. And I think Ren is more on the snowflake side. Like we like to see the different attributes of a project. We really think about systems change when we're funding climate solutions. And so we're, you know, that's kind of why we're doing a large funding through a large through many different sectors. Um, but I think, for a project to ultimately have that systems change, you need to be connected with the larger system. That sounds redundant, but in the context of forests and small landowners, that's the people who are on the ground. Um, and I think that being able to share stories from landowners with our consumers helps people feel more connected. Like maybe that person's from Maine, or maybe that person's from a forested state, and they know someone who has been managing forest, or they really enjoy going out and walking around forests and have some sort of emotional connection, or relationship with forest landowners or forests themselves, and kind of breaking down those barriers and saying like this is Bonnie and Peter who you're helping through this project, and these are the benefits that you're providing to these specific people. These are the specific benefits that you're providing, helps carbon credits become less ambiguous, less vague, less just like literally up in the sky carbon, or in the ground carbon. Like it feels more tangible and meaningful. And ultimately, I think that's what Ren tries to cultivate, is like a community of people who are all committed to the same goal and want to feel a connection to the work that they're having. If they're sending us $25 a month, they want to know where that $25 is going and what impact it's having. So stories are really important to us, and I think having the perspective of landowners center stage, and the majority of nature-based projects that we do, whether that's we have a mangrove project in Myanmar, and we try to tell stories from the local community there. We have biomass burial projects, and we try to tell stories about communities there as well. And so I think that, yeah, it just kind of like makes climate action feel less ambiguous and like more tied to the specific person. And like ultimately, I think there's like this kind of strange tension in the carbon market where a lot of people just want to see pictures of pretty trees, and like that's not always the case for a good carbon project. But I think when you can find those good pictures of pretty trees and also find stories of landowners that are really rich and informative and realistic, I think those are part of what Ren really tries to highlight.
When we were preparing for this webinar, you brought up an example of how Renoster is co-creating the program with landowners. And it really struck me because in my mind, I was like, well, yeah, of course we would do that with landowners. Like, why wouldn't we involve landowners in that part of our program design? But you mentioned that it was actually quite unique. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's specifically, hopefully I'm not saying anything out of turn, but when I was in New York, meeting with some of the Apollo team, including the lawyers who were drafting the landowner contracts, like the lawyer was literally talking to the landowners, like, hey, let's sit down and like figure out how to draft this contract so that it works for you. And like even talking to the landowners out in the field, I was like, hey, how's it going? Like drafting the contract, like what do you want to see and what don't you want to see in the contract? And they were like, these are my main concerns. These are the things that I want to include in the contract. Like, I want to make sure that, if we pass away, that the project can get transferred over to the right people. And that's like participatory design at its core, right? Like, and that's what makes it successful. Like, if you don't make the contract work for the landowner might be more hesitant to sign. And then in the long run, it might not actually be like useful over a 25 or 30-year period, or however long the contract is, because, the person might pass away, or the person might move, or, have different things that happen in their lives that force, change of ownership in the land. And so figuring out like, what are the diverse needs and like things that they want to be protected against. I think that's like how you make a good project, right? You can't just like go into a community and say like you have to sign this contract in order to get this money and you have to do it our way. It's like, no, we want to do it together. We want to do it in a way that works for both of us. Um, and I try to find projects that work in that way. I think that's like free, prior, and informed consent, right? It's like going through each step of the process and making sure people are informed and consent to the process. And um, we know that's how good carbon projects are created. And I think that translates across the board for the majority of any sort of nature-based project. Is like you have to connect with the community. You have to understand what their goals and objectives are, and you have to make it work for them. Otherwise, the project isn't going to work.
Uh, you have now delivered us to my favorite topic, and it's something that Ted and I talk about a lot at work. And I think it's the perfect note to end on here for like the last 5 to 10ish minutes before we jump to questions. And that is, how do we make programs work for the whole community? And so when we talk about making equitable forest carbon programs, often the focus is equitable forest carbon for small landowners. And that is, in fact, the title of the webinar. However, small landowners are part of a larger rural community. There are loggers who need enough work year round and year to year to be able to come in and do those sustainable harvests, to do those silvicultural treatments that will increase climate resiliency and carbon storage in the long run. You need to have foresters. I mean, there's a whole infrastructure in these rural communities supporting sustainable forestry. And so the question isn't just how do we support small landowners in accessing carbon markets, but how do we design our programs such that we're setting up landowners to contribute to a long-term sustainable forest-based economy that can contribute things like timber-based building materials that are alternatives to high emissions materials, or bio-based alternatives that are alternatives to plastics and things like that. There's a really exciting forest-based future in Maine. How do we make sure that we're helping small landowners be part of it? And so, Ted, I don't know if you'd like to kick us off here, but do you want to speak to kind of the long-term pathways for climate action that the Apollo program is designed to create?
Sure. I think each forest is different, each situation is different. But what I get behind is that, in Maine, I would say we grow trees. We don't grow them out long enough. Pretty short rotations. I mean, not in all cases. I want this to be super broad, but I think as a whole, there's strong pulp markets, or there's always been strong pulp markets. People get up, we'll say up against it, meaning they're under hard times financially, and they may go in and harvest their 100 acres prematurely. And then basically you're doing this, it's kind of cyclical. Somebody needs a roof on their barn or what have you, and they got, they know there's $10,000 worth of stumpage there. They go out and cut it. And I actually had somebody say that to me finally on a phone call a couple of weeks ago, that they needed the money, so they're going to go do that sort of thing. And I think what forest carbon for small landowners can do is help people grow bigger trees, more saw logs. That, it's really hard for a landowner to look at their land, if it's a bunch of small saplings, right? Because it's been heavily harvested. It's really hard to visualize like what that looks like when you have a stand where you're growing, saw logs. And so it's a long time to get there, but like Renoster can play a role in providing a bridge, a financial bridge to get to where you have saw log, almost saw logs, where you can start seeing the forest and how to manage it. It's just a lot easier to manage it. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you just look at a cut over place, I mean, it's pretty hard to be like, oh, I can't wait to do all these things with this thing. I mean, it's just the time and the effort is huge. So getting people to a place where there's saw logs, I think the management, the proper improved management will come with that, where people can see the value of like pre-commercial thinning and all that stuff. There's obviously people like that in Maine that do have stands that look like that, and that they can it's really easy to visualize these sorts of things. But, over the course, I've been with Renoster for about a year. There's a lot of land that's sold or purchased by people in Maine, small landowners that's been harvested prior. Could be a management company, could be a logger, could be a real estate company, what have you, but they buy that land without a lot of trees on it, or the volume's quite low. And that's a hard place to come from. And so, in terms of it also is a barrier somewhat for Renoster because we're really looking for landowners to show that they've had a commercial harvest. And so if somebody doesn't have the trees for a commercial harvest yet, obviously they're not going to fit the program, and nor should they go out and harvest the trees just to join the program. That's not what we're saying either. But so I really think like deferring that harvest, getting the trees out to a bigger size, just helps everybody visualize good forest management. And so
Yeah, we talk a lot about giving landowners flexibility in the future. If you have a bunch of nice saw logs, then you don't have to clear cut. You can just go in and do a selective harvest.
yeah,
You can do better forest management when you have that support to get to older, more mature, more valuable trees, that's one part of it. But the other part of our our program design to make sure that our pathway for climate action in rural communities really outlives our carbon projects beyond setting up the actual forest paradigm to be self-sustaining at higher baseline levels of carbon across the landscape is this storytelling piece, I think that you mentioned, Sophie, where we are connecting the lived climate experiences of diverse communities across the US, across the globe through this shared stewardship story. And that's really special. And I really don't know of any other mechanism to do that, which I guess doesn't come with a specific question for either of you, but I'd open the floor for any final thoughts here before we jump to questions.
yeah, I would say, growing trees out to a bigger size helps everybody, helps the landowner is going to get more stumpage, and it helps loggers are going to be able to harvest. You're going to harvest less and get more. Like that's something we just haven't had a lot of opportunity for in this state. It's usually like volume driven, and that's where I see like just real opportunities improved forest management. And I know our stumpage rates, I don't have a graph in front of me, but I know like Washington state stumpage rates paid to the landowner are astronomically higher than probably Maine's. Like it's pennies, but it just leads to, it just drives more not bad practices. I understand why people are doing it because they need something financially. Like they need money and they are harvesting, but they maybe are harvesting way too early. So get them out there to where we can get our stumpage rates up there. They're going to be a lot higher for landowners. So
Yeah, I think my final thought is like, I'm not a forester, and it's so great to have Ted and other folks from the Apollo team have so much knowledge about the complexities of the forest industry and the different kind of markets and products and political dynamics and intricacies of how, they work within a state, let alone a region, let alone a country and internationally. And, one of the things that I really liked about the Apollo program was their leakage model that kind of integrates some of this economic understanding into the kind of larger picture. And I'm certainly not an expert in the nuances of it, but what I specifically like about Apollo is that it acknowledges the economic reality of forest management and works in the ways that kind of Ted was mentioning, like people need money now, or um, and that's the reality for these landowners. Like they want to make an income off of their land. And so the way that Apollo is set up, I just think that acknowledges like the reality of this. And maybe the reality isn't always pretty all the time, but it's the world that we live in. And I think bringing more landowners onto the Apollo platform is like how we kind of ultimately get to the types of systems change that we want to see, whether that's like systems change for the entire climate or like systems change within the main forest industry. And I think that's like a really powerful story to tell.
Well, it's really exciting to be able to help tell it with you. So Thank you both for participating today. I will now jump over to our Q&A. We have two questions from attendees. The first is Renoster Apollo actively paying landowners for carbon credits or have transactions not actually taken place yet? Where are we in the process? So Sophie, do you want to kind of at a high level describe where Ren and Renoster are to the extent that you can?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so definitely will like to defer back to you in terms of like where specifically y'all are at in the process. But basically, Ren made we have an offtake agreement in place, and we made a pre-purchase up front. That pre-purchase has been backed by Kita Insurance, and so our deliveries are protected. Really nice for me. I can send that money to Apollo today. They can start their work on the ground, and then Ren's consumers are protected if credits are not delivered for some reason. Those credits will be placed with a like project. Really powerful usage of Kita insurance, in my opinion. I think it shows that insurance can be really catalytic in this market and can be used in ways that are kind of outside of like what we think of typical insurance to be. My understanding of where we're at right now is that the protocol is in public consultation, I believe, with isometric, and will be finalized in the next coming months. And once the protocol is approved, then they'll move on to verification and validation and actually paying the landowners. But definitely correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, Ted, do you want to kind of briefly describe our process for finding landowners who are interested, narrowing that down to the landowners who are really serious, and then kind of calculating final numbers for those folks for a
Mhm.
final contract?
Yep, sure. Yeah, so when somebody's interested, we go through, obviously it happens with a conversation. Um, we supply, give them an MOU, memorandum of understanding that lays out like that we're gonna, if they want to move forward and they meet all the qualifications, that that basically says we're gonna talk finances. We're gonna give you an idea of what your, the value to us or the carbon markets is of your land. We're gonna give you an assessment. And so yeah, so people sign the MOU, the science team goes in the background and comes up with different contract links and pricing and all that sort of stuff. Um, and then we share that with landowners. We've started sharing contracts with landowners at this time, and so we're just continuing to talk to new people and things like that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Ted. So yes, we are signing final contracts, and it is really exciting. Um, the next question, I'm going to go ahead and attempt to answer this, and it is, what would have to be true for you to take the Apollo platform to other countries or contexts? And so uh, basically, we need to start with, what data does the Apollo platform need? We really rely first and foremost on high quality LiDAR, light detection and range. We're using airborne laser scanning systems, so LiDAR that's flown with a plane. And that gives us a really detailed structural mapping of forests. And in the United States and in many other countries, most provinces, states have been flown border to border with this kind of high precision LiDAR. So on a high level, one way to answer the question is, anywhere that we have really great airplane flown LiDAR, one could develop what's called an enhanced forest inventory. However, the other piece of that is that to make sure that your structural information from the LiDAR makes sense, you have to match it to points on the ground. So you also need to have really great plot level field measurements from a variety of representative forest types. And from there, you develop a sampling scheme where you're making sure that the models of the forest that you're developing from the LiDAR really accurately represent what's on the ground. But that's the core of Apollo's technology. And we are planning to expand beyond Maine. Obviously, we want to have a really strong footing in Maine, really serve Maine landowners. That's our number one priority for now. But yes, we absolutely are hopeful that we can expand to other states and other countries soon, because we really do think that small landowners deserve this opportunity, and we think that the climate benefits for everyone else are quite immense. And then there's a question about accuracy for technology, which I'm going to punt on because I am not one of our science team members, but we do have a lot of videos addressing how that kind of works on LinkedIn. And we also have a large variety of blog posts on the Renoster website that dig into some of these technical details as well. So I would refer attendee questions there that we might not have time to answer at this exact moment. So I think that concludes the webinar for today. Catherine, I know that you're hanging out in the background. Is there anything that we've missed?
Nope, I don't think so. I think you got all of them. And with that last question too, I can, if whoever asked that wants to send us a message, we can directly send you some resources as well. We're happy to do that.
Great. Well, thank you everyone who attended today. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you're excited about what we're doing. Sophie and Ted, thank you again. Looking forward to working with you in the near future.
Thanks, Mary. Appreciate it.
Right. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.